Hey team, this week we talked to Lance O'Sullivan.
Lance is a Hall of Fame jockey and trainer, and we hear about his 2,000 wins in New Zealand, some of his most incredible adventures overseas. This is a real sort of peek behind the curtain of the New Zealand racing industry.
Yeah, at some points I felt really ill-equipped to ask the questions that we did, but we got to some cool areas like animal welfare, what really happens on a race day, and the world of a jockey.
Yeah, I learned a lot about this. Lance is such an awesome guy, a perfect guest to take us into that world. This episode is brought to you by TAB. Download the new app today and get your bet on.
Lance O'Sullivan, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Very excited to get into it today. Were you up at 3:30 a.m. this morning?
Yeah, 3:35. My alarm clock goes off 5 days a week at 3:35, so it's up and into it, and turn on the autopilot, and away we go.
We recently had Greg Foran on, Air New Zealand CEO, and he talked to us through his 4 a.m. routine in detail. I'm quite interested in the detail of what actually happens. Like, walk us through that morning.
I'll paint you a picture of Greg. So Greg got up, I think 70 press-ups on his knuckles. He runs
stretched for 45 minutes.
Really went into blow by blow how that works.
Is that all? Only 70. Like I tell, I get up at 3:35, do the normal brush your teeth and all that, out to the kitchen, make a coffee, into the walk to the garage, jump in the car, drink the coffee and listen to the 4 o'clock news on the way.
I thought you were going to say between two beers.
Yeah, carry on.
That comes after. But yeah, and you get to the barn. I get there usually about 4:05, and I've got a wee way to drive. And I sit down. It's a lot's going on before I get there, and go through the morning's work, what we're going to do with the horses. Somebody comes in and reports any problems, and out we go. Head out about 4:20, put the jocks on, and head over to the track. And usually takes, we usually finish by roughly 9 o'clock in the morning, and hopefully things have gone smoothly. Usually there's 1 or 2 hiccups along the way. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Is there an advantage to training super early in the morning other than having the rest of your day free?
That's a good question. Everybody asks that. And the reason why we get up and do it so early is one is the heat. It's the cool of the day. And number 2, if we got, say, barrier trials or race meetings on that day, you would never get through your workload. And so that's the reason for it.
And my assumption would be if you're getting up at 3:35, you're in bed at 5:30 p.m. or something like that. Is that accurate?
No, I tell you what, I'm probably 5 hours a night.
So how are you operating on that?
Yeah, well, I don't know, years and years of doing it. And probably the only day I would have a kip would be on a Thursday afternoon. I'd have a kip probably for an hour and a half, but the rest of the week, apart from the weekends, of course, Saturday night, I'd probably clock up 9 or 10 hours. But 5 hours pretty much.
Wow. Are you still needing an alarm clock to get up at 3:35? Does the body clock sort of...
No, I tell you what, I'm never late for work. That's one thing. Even the staff say they can set their clock by me when I walk into work in the morning. I set 2 alarm clocks, and they're actually 2 phones. I set them, but often, look, very rarely would they actually wake me. I'd be awake just prior to them going off.
Far out. That's some real discipline, eh?
Yeah.
And are you having a breakfast or anything? Eating at that time?
I have breakfast when I get back, so
right.
9:15. Couple of pieces of toast, black coffee, and away we go.
Far out. Love that. Spartan. It's a Spartan lifestyle. We've had some great buy-in from the family, Lance. I'm not sure if you know how we operate. We like to ask, what are they really like? And your daughter Georgia has actually come to the party.
This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, with a list, which I want to make our way through. So she said in headline quirks of Lance, very superstitious, always has been, always will be, i.e., never put champagne in fridge before a big race, never puts shoes above ground level, always puts his right sock on first, never his left, the last one out of jockey's room when riding.
Pretty bang on.
That's it? All accurate?
Pretty accurate. and look, there's one of my reasons for it. In fact, it was my mother was the shoes above the ground level.
Yeah.
She was a superstitious old lady.
Yeah. And you just picked that, you just inherited that.
Well,
Is it a bad luck thing?
Yeah, well, she always said it was bad luck to do that. Same with the champagne in the fridge, and right sock on first, you're right all day. I actually learned that from an old jockey back in the day.
Yeah. What would happen if you'd found out someone had put champagne in a fridge before one of your race days or something?
Look, it would make no difference. It's just something that we were brought up to believe. But look, all those superstitions now, let's face it, they're rubbish, but still do it.
Yeah, that's funny. The habit. There's the power of habit. I guess like waking up 3:35 every day. What else is on that list?
Okay,
Steve?
grossly competitive, riding days, Treasure Island, family card, tennis matches. What do you like when you lose?
Well, it doesn't really matter whether you win or lose until you lose. But look, I'm not as competitive now as what I used to be. Like I play.
Right? Are you sure about that?
I play golf poorly, and and I'm not too competitive there. But back in the day, I was certainly very competitive. Training horses, going to the races. In fact, my training partner, a chap called Andrew Scott, he prefers not to travel with me. And I said to him one day, why? What's the problem? He said, I've never been with such a bad loser. He said, you just hate losing.
Yeah, right.
But, it's just been fiercely competitive. When I was doing my line of work, being a jock, it was all about winning, and that's your job. Look, I'm a gracious loser now. Certainly if somebody wins, I'm going to shake their hand and say, well done, because I certainly understand just how difficult it is to win and our line in the field of what we do. But it's not a bad way to be competitive.
Yeah, and it's pretty consistent across all of our guests who have been, the very top in their field. You've got to be competitive.
Okay, can I? Well, I know you want to rip through the list, but it's a niche area of mine. Treasure Island. Apologies, I don't know. Did you win that?
Well, actually, it was couples Treasure Island. So it was my wife and I were paired together. And I had been asked prior to go on the show, and I said at the time, I'm too busy, and really, it's not me. And it was actually my wife, Bridgette, who suggested to Julie Christie at the time, why don't you do a couples? If we do a couples, perhaps I can get them on board. And I went on the show. With the idea. I said to Julie at the time, I said, look, I'm busy. 4 or 5 days, I've got to get off the island. I said, I can't hang around. And as it turned out, look, the show was the good old days where we had to tandem skydive from 10,000 feet out of a helicopter. You landed on the island. There was no food. You had to earn food. Well, that's where I sort of excelled. And the year we were there was the Fear Factor champion from South Africa. He was there. Simon Dool was in there. I became very good friends with Simon after the show, or actually during, and a few other sporting icons at the time. I guess some of them were, or they thought they were. I'm not too sure. And so we had to pick the team. And the team I picked, I was just going to make sure Simon was in the team. And, of course, with Simon and the team, we sort of became pretty matey-mate. And we said, well, we made a pact right from the start. We said, okay, if both of us make it to the final four, there was $50,000 worth of prize money attached. If both of us make it to the final four, if one of us goes on and wins, the other one, we were going to go halves in the money. But whoever lost had to give their $25,000 to charity. And funny thing, we both made it to the final four. We both made it to the final. So we were celebrating before we even went out for the final. But anyhow, it just came down to bragging rights. Bridgette and myself won. We sent Simon the $25,000 after the show. I presume he gave it to a charity. I didn't ask. But I think back then when we did the show, people don't realise how difficult it was. I think Bridgette lost 8 kilos over 3 weeks.
Oh, shit.
So there was no food. There was no food whatsoever. The first challenge we actually won, so we had food, and I think we were into 2.5 days into the show, and they were trying to negotiate to get food. And when I talk about food, the food was actually rice. There was as much water as you could drink, but the food that we were given was rice. And Julie Christie came to me. They were trying to negotiate to get food and said, if you don't give them food, we're going to have no show. So that was the only time in the show that we sort of had to, I didn't actually like getting food. I thought if we wipe them out, I'm going to lose it, get rid of 8 people straight away in the first 3 days. So, it came down. As I said, I was going to be on there for 3, 4, 5 days max. And we were on there for about 6 days. And I said to my wife, Bridgette, I think we can win this.
Competitive.
We can win this. But the thing is, when we started doing all of the challenges, we would run second to last or last because a lot of them were a lot of running and there were a lot of athletic guys on the show. But as the food was taken out of them, they got weaker and weaker. And it was probably about day 5, we were starting to run 1 or 2 in every event we were competing in. And that's how it turned out.
There you go. You've skipped to one of the points there, which is often forgets to eat due to the riding days, doesn't feel hungry. Is that accurate?
Yeah, pretty much. I get up in the morning, I have a black coffee, go to the track, work through till, probably 9:15. I'd have, say, 2 slices of toast and a black coffee for breakfast, and I could go right through all day. And as Bridgette would call me 1 o'clock and have you eaten? But it's just something that's never really worried me. I must have that gene where I just don't get hungry.
All right, we're nearly there. This one surprised me. Hasn't got on a horse for 15-ish years.
Well, when I retired from being a jockey, I continued to ride work, and I trained. I had 12 months completely out of the racing industry, and I did a bit of actually work on the television just as a commons person. I wasn't much good at it either, to be fair. But I started riding work again, and I had a good friend of mine, a guy called Graham Richardson. He was riding work at the time. He was a horse trainer, and he had a very simple fall one morning and fell off, broke a bone in his back. He was in traction for about 3 and a bit months. And I thought, this is just stupid. Why am I doing this? I just don't need to take the risk. Another jockey, Shane Dye, very good friend of mine, and he kept saying to me, we spoke most weeks, and he kept saying, why are you riding work? You're just tempting fate. And he was quite right. So I just pulled up stumps after that and never got back on a horse since.
Do you miss it? Do you miss that feeling?
Yes, but you've got to be, I'm sort of getting on in years now, you've got to be pretty smart about it. I don't want to, jeopardize the rest of my life just through something silly, wanting to ride a horse.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like social sport. You think, actually, I don't want to tweak a hammy. I mean, riding a horse is a lot more risk involved than having a competitive game of touch footy down at the local park.
Well, it's pretty unforgiving. And I think, since I retired, 2 jockeys that I actually competed against continued to ride work when they retired. And actually 3, they ended up in wheelchairs. So I thought, I just don't need to take the risk.
Last one on my list. So these all came from Georgia, and she is dating Damien McKenzie. And I wondered what that's like when she first brings home the new boyfriend and it's one of the greatest All Blacks, and then he starts becoming a regular fixture in your lounge at your home. What's that dynamic like?
Well, Damien and Georgia actually dated when she was about 17, way back, I think, might have been about 6 months. At the time, he hadn't been picked for the team, so he got the flick. No, he didn't.
I love that one.
That was the other one she said, is that you got a wicked sense of humour and you've got a good poker face when you're starting the gags.
She can read me a bit.
Yeah.
But no, they actually had a bit of a fling way back in the day, and he was busy at the time. I think he might have done stint in Japan. They sort of went their own ways. She went down to University of Wellington, so it really wasn't going to work. But Damien's just like having another family member. He's just very normal, plays cards. I think he cheats. He wins a lot. He's very competitive. But no, he just fits in really well.
Do you see much of him like in the lead up to a home game? Or does he keep to himself? What does that kind of week look like?
Look, we have a group of us where we chat, on text together. But look, most Mondays he would spend at our place. Well, he has been of late anyway, and Monday evenings. And I'd talk to him about this and that about the game. He's not a bragger. If I was as good as him, I'd be telling everybody, "Did you see this? You see that?" But no, he's certainly anything about the game you sort of got to drag out of him. But no, he's just a very normal person.
Yeah, you say that you'd brag, but I've heard you're very humble as well. I'm going to bring some words from Bridgette in later. She said you would never say you were the best despite being the best. So
well, Kaylin congested that, and she said, in the comfort of your own home, you will say, I was the greatest of all time, and don't you forget it.
Yeah, I do say that to the girls.
Public v private. Great. All right. I feel like we're starting to get to know Lance. Okay, so I want to go back to the very beginning. Your dad, Dave O'Sullivan, was a legend, New Zealand racing Hall of Famer. He was a jockey, then a trainer, one of the best to ever do it. What was your relationship like with your dad growing up, and what was it like growing up in that environment, and how did it influence you?
Well, I think, if you go back to our early days growing up, you see some kids at school, they're from the poor family, and that was us. We were from very, very humble beginnings. There were 5 children. I don't think my parents had a car until number 2 child came along. We had a good family life. We were well loved, we were well cared for, but my mother, she made most of our clothes. She sewed them herself. She was a worker. She was a very clever lady, to be honest, in a lot of ways. My dad was doing what I do now, up early, gone for the day. He was a workaholic. He never attended any of our rugby games or anything. He was too busy on the weekends. That was the job of my mother when she had time, but usually my older brother Paul would double me down to the rugby park. In fact, he coached us. I think he was our coach when he was about 13 years of age. But as far as our family life goes, we had a very good family life, but everybody was busy. And in those earlier years, they were struggling. It probably wasn't until about 1973 when my father got his first good racehorse that we started to lift to the next level of him being recognised as a good horse trainer. A horse called Upik, of all things, which is an Eskimo doll. But he trained jumpers in the early years. Back to when he was a jockey, he would say he was a mediocre jockey. He did win a Group 1 race, but he was sort of very much middle of the road. But there was a lot more competitive back then. There was probably 60 or 70 jockeys in the jockeys room, when nowadays you got 18 or 20. So it's all changed. But he was a very good horseman to ride for. You're pretty tough. You had to perform. If you didn't perform, you certainly were told. There was one year I was leading jockey, and he stood me down for a month from riding the horses at Wexford. He was leading trainer. I still had to turn up every day, ride work. But he said, you're not riding, you're not hungry, and you've got to ride better. And I was leading jockey, I was riding for everybody else. He stood me down for a month, but it was the best thing ever. I can recall one day we had 6 winners Derby Day at Ellerslie. It's a big day of the year. I think he had 7 runners. And on the way home in the car, all he talked about was the 7th one that got beat. What was I doing at the half mile? He had these binoculars. He could not only see me visually, but he could see me change my mind when I was on a horse's back. But he's extremely competitive. And never, I suppose, if I could say something that was negative against our whole operation back then, we never really stopped and smelt the roses along the way. It was next week, what were we going to do? But it was probably a reason why we were so competitive and why we were so good. As a team, my brother Paul trained in partnership, so it was 3 of us at the time. And it was just all about winning. We're fiercely competitive. We had a good staff. We had a good team of horses. And it was just, it was on to next week. And, after each season ticked over, we'd win the premiership that year. It was on to the next year. And that's the way it was. But extremely good horseman, driven. We were all driven, but probably because we had nothing when we were early on.
Caitlin described him as a real gentleman, though, as well. Like you paint a picture of a very hard taskmaster, but he was a gentleman as well, right?
Absolutely. Look. I think the day he passed, he was one of those people. He had no enemies. He played fair. He played hard, but he was fair. He was well liked, well respected, and he had no enemies because he didn't do anything untoward towards anybody else that would make them dislike him. But amongst us all, he was very competitive.
And it's a unique situation with your dad, your brother, and yourself as this really tight knit team. Were they kind of looking back
just amazing, amazing days to be able to share so much time working with your family?
There were so many different occasions, where, we'd planned something, 6 months in advance, a particular race with a particular horse, and it would come off. And that was just amazing, when you think back. And there was so many times where it did come off. And yeah, they were great times, and I don't think we've seen any other, training establishment or any unit as tight as what we were and had the success that we actually had as a team.
Were you always destined to follow in your father's footsteps? Like, was there a period growing up where you considered going in a different direction?
No, I was never really keen on the horses until I was probably about 13 or 14. When I was at school, I actually wanted to be a lawyer, to be honest, but I was watching all those TV programs, the films, the lawyer had the flash car, the good-looking girl sitting next to him. I got to when I was about 13 or 14, and I was starting to get a real taste of the industry. I could see the success that we were having in the yard, what was going on. And it was, we were never encouraged. In the early years, we were actually discouraged to be a part of the stable environment. It wasn't the sort of place where you wanted your children working probably at the time. And I can recall when I was about 14 years of age, I went to my father and I said, I've looked at what's happening. I'd love to be a jockey. One day I'd like to become a jockey. And he said to me, well, it's not really up to me. It's up to your mother. She had a fair bit to say. She was really the boss of us all, to be fair. And he said, go and ask her. So I can always recall the day I went and asked her, thinking, well, I'm 1,000,000 to 1 for her to say yes to this. And all she said, I don't care what you do in life, but whatever you do, try and be the best. She said, I don't care if you're the local garbage man, be the best at it. And it was great advice. So in other words, that was her way of saying yes. She was a stickler for education at school. And in fact, I remember the 5th year, I went into my 5th year at school, which means nothing now getting your score says we all know. But you had to sit it back in those days.
You didn't get it back in those days. Your life was over.
Exactly. Well, you had to go back. And I can recall we did the interview exams and I was going to be a jockey. It was just the internal exams at the school, failed everything, thinking, well, it doesn't matter. So we're 2 weeks out and my mother said to me, she said, if you don't pass School C, you're going back next year until you pass. Well, I worked out you can actually study for School C in 2 years and pass everything. So there you go. I think the rest of the year is a complete waste of time, but in 2 weeks, it was just over 2 weeks, I studied. I'd a couple of good teachers at school that said, come on lunchtime, come in after school, we'll tutor you. And yeah, rest is history, got School C.
That good advice from your mum, have you sort of embraced that as a dad? Like if your daughters came to you with a bit of an outlandish career option.
I'm going to marry an All Black.
I want to be a YouTuber or something, which you're like, oh, I don't know, that's a good idea. You're like, do you embrace that same, like just be the best at it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the girls are fortunate. They got a very good mother as well. But right from an early age, I think our girls from probably about the age of 10 or 11, Bridgette and I are going to do something in business. We discuss everything with them. We have from that age, and it's amazing listening to their point of views way back then, but we've always included them. But now they both got their own businesses of their own. They're extremely hard workers, driven, probably work too hard. But yeah, they want to be good at whatever they do. And as you know, now they do business and marketing and what's it called, digital marketing or something, but they're both very good at it. I've tried to encourage them both to go in together, but at the moment they're doing their own thing. But yeah, it's all about, they want to succeed at what they're doing or try and be the best at what they're doing. And I believe they both are.
We're about to move into the racing career. So for our audience, there'll be some diehard, racing enthusiasts and fans that know it, and there'll be others that don't know anything about it. So it's going to be a bit of some good questions and some shit questions, basically. But what makes a good jockey? Like, what made you the best? What made you different to others?
Look. What makes any athlete good at what they're doing? Why is Dan Carter, why is Damien McKenzie good at what they're doing? I wasn't gifted from the start. I worked very hard at what I did. But I think, you can either do it or you can't. If that, it's like, why can they kick their goals? Why can they do a sidestep, do what they do? And I think being a jockey, I think we look at a guy like James McDonald now, who's probably, in my opinion, he's the most gifted jockey ever to come out of New Zealand. And I think he won the world rankings the last 2 years running. But he's just naturally gifted at what he does.
What does that mean, naturally gifted? In terms of jockey, in terms of horse racing?
Well, they just got the feel. They got the empathy for the animal. They got the feel. Look, you can get the same horse. You can put 20 different riders on, put them in a straight line and say, okay, you're going to gallop this horse over 600 meters as fast as what you can get this horse to run. And the difference and the margins, from the fastest jockey to the last would be quite significant. And it's where the point of balance, where they sit on the horse, their hands, there's a lot to it. And horses will just run for some jockeys as opposed to others, and you can sort of work that out fairly early on. You get a jockey and you watch them ride a horse, same horse, you put somebody else on and they can't get it to run. They're just gifted. They just do it.
Is there an undescribable element to it? Like a connection between you and the horse, which perhaps you can't put into words, or is it taking it a bit far?
Well, the best thing I say is, we've had young apprentice jockeys that have been indentured to our stable, and I say, try and be one. You and the horse, you're one. It's not the horse, it's not the jockey. I said, become a part of that horse. And it's hard to explain, when a horse moves, you're just a part of it. You're not the bloke on top. You just, as I say, you just don't move. You just mold into the horse, and that's the best way to describe it.
So now I'm curious, when you say you weren't naturally gifted, you worked really hard at it. So then there's an element of that natural gift, but where does the hard work come in?
Well, I worked hard at becoming a part of the horse, and, just through watching other jockeys, who are other riders out there that I believe were better riders than me, but a lot of it came down to tactics and smarts, if you like. And fortunately, there were a few of them weren't that smart. But I worked hard at my trade. Watched other good jockeys. I was very fortunate. I got to ride overseas quite a lot in Australia. Spent a good deal of time in Hong Kong, where it's next level at the time. But I knew I had to get better, and I wanted to be good. And it's all about planning, preparation. It's like, you've got to go out there with a plan. You've got to be prepared. And if you're not doing that, you're going to fail.
Was there a part on this timeline when you realised, shit, I can actually be the best that's ever done this in New Zealand? Like, did something click and you think, I've got this?
Funny you say that. It actually did. It was back in 1985. I rode a horse for my father in the Melbourne Cup, and I was only an apprentice at the time. There were actually two occasions. I'll go on to the other one shortly, but I rode a horse in the Melbourne Cup, finished second. Had every opportunity to win. A mare called Corrie May.
Was that your first time?
First time in the Melbourne Cup. I think I rode in it 7 times. Second was the closest, second and a fourth. But just being out there on the big stage and to perform under pressure, but knowing I could do it. Of course, I think I rode 40, 46, 47 winners. Yeah, 84-85 season, 85-86 season, I rode 143.
Holy shit.
And that came down to confidence, self-belief. You got to believe that you're the best. And also, it was the first year I actually had a racing manager, a guy called Stuart Lang. And he actually came up to me. We were on holiday on a beach in Tahiti. He came up to me and he introduced himself and he said, I watched you ride. He said, I'd like to help you. He was actually a punter at the time. And we became very good friends, still are. And he helped me with my rides, choosing what to get on. And the rest is history. Another story was in about the same year, 84, I think it was. I rode in a race called the AJC Oaks, the Australian Oaks in Sydney. And my father that year had a filly owned by Sir Robert Sangster called it's Mapley Heights. I'm showing my age now. I couldn't even.
Well, I was about to say, you've ridden thousands of horses. I think we could forgive you for forgetting one name.
So anyhow, Mappley Heights, and I was only a kid at the time, and I rode her in New Zealand, won a couple of races on her in New Zealand. Then she went to Australia. They chose not to take me. They put on an Australian jockey there. She finished second in a Group 1 race there. Group 1 for the person who's...
Thank you. It was on my list of what is a Group 1 race.
There's probably about roughly 16 or 17 Group 1 races in New Zealand per year. There may be a couple more, I'm not too sure, but the Group 1 is the elite, the pinnacle. So your Derby's a Group 1 race. Your Derby, your Oaks, those sort of main events. Your Telegraph Handicap, your Railway Handicap.
And is that because the purse is bigger, the prizes are bigger, or there's a difference between the horses, or what?
They're your best of your best. Your Melbourne Cup's a Group 1. Your Cox Plate's a Group 1. Japan Cup. I say they're the best of the best. Mappley Heights went over there, so I'm losing my train of thought. While she was over there, my father lost her. She went to another trainer over there, Colin Hayes, who was the leading trainer in Australia at the time, went to Colin Hayes. So my father took a horse over in the spring to the Melbourne Carnival, came back with no horse. Long story short, the Autumn Carnival comes along. There's the Australian Oaks in Sydney, which is the main 3-odd fillies blue ribboned race of the season. My father had another horse back at home called La Souveraine. So La Souveraine, I think she'd won 3 races. She went over there for a lead-up race for the Oaks. She had to run a place to actually qualify to run in the AJC Oaks, which she did. She finished second. I rode her. And then she lined up in the AJC Oaks. We weren't favourite. Mappley Heights was favourite. And Brent Thompson was the jockey who was the gun jockey in Australia at the time. Long story short, we're back together in the field. I got to run through them. Mappley Heights went around them, and La Souveraine beat Mappley Heights by a neck. So it was quite a fairy tale story. And I was the first apprentice jockey to win the Australian Oaks since World War II. And I believe still the only apprentice jockey to win the Oaks since World War II. So it was quite a feat, because everybody, was a lot of pressure on my dad, taking a horse over for that event, let alone taking his own son. He was an apprentice jockey riding 40-odd winners a season here in New Zealand. Yeah. So that was the start of it. That, and then probably 12 months later was 6 months later was the Melbourne Cup.
I said there might be some bad questions in this one. This is potentially one of them. I'm wondering, when you're growing up, right, teenage years, and you're deciding that you're good at this and you want to get into it, size is obviously a very important part of being a jockey. Are you not wanting to get taller because then you'll be too big to do the job?
Well, funny you say that. When I went out to have my first race day ride, I was 5'1.5", and my silks were made by a lady down the road. And I can recall going and getting measured up, and she said to me, "Well, you won't be in this game very long. You're going to get far too tall." Well, I never grew. I stayed at 5'1.5". I actually lie. I tell people 5'2". It's 5'1.5". And I was probably about 47, 48 kilos. Now, just to let you know, back then the weights were a lot lower than what they are now. I think the minimum weight now is 53. Back then, we would have to ride 47 kilos. And that's including your saddle, your boots, your full tack.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the weights were a lot different back then. So now I'm probably about 57 kilos. That's what I walk. But at the age of 33, I rode in a race called the Caulfield Cup, and I rode at 46 kilos, an Australian horse. So you can imagine what I looked like.
Yeah.
I looked worse than when I was on Treasure Island. So it was pretty, you had to be, your weight was a big part of your job. And each week, I'd have to take off usually 2 kilos on the Friday. You only race Wednesday, Saturday. And on the Saturday, the weights were generally a lot lower than what they were on a Wednesday. So your weight was a big part. So I'd have 1 day off a week from my diet, which was after the last race on a Saturday through to Monday morning, and I'd usually put on about 4 kilos in that period.
Jeez. So, but do you remember internally wanting to get tall, when you stayed at that height? Do you remember wanting to get taller, or were you thinking that I'll stay here and I can be the best in the world?
Well, look, the only time I've ever wished I was taller was when I was standing in a bar when I retired. You stand on your shoes. But no, it was a big advantage because while I was shorter, I don't like to say that word shorter, but it also gave me more opportunities because I could ride the horses with the light weights.
Yeah, the weight cutting thing is a fascinating sub area altogether. Like that, yeah.
It's your job.
Yeah.
And I look at jockeys now and, I don't feel sorry for them having to lose weight. That's your job. If you don't like it, do something else.
And is it seasonal?
Yeah, well, the season starts on the 1st of August and it runs through till the 31st of July. So you get about 12 hours off. Yeah, so you get no time off. So look, I used to take the first 2 weeks off of August every year, and the only other time you got a holiday was through injury or suspension.
I got a question here. How much horse, how much jockey? And I guess we've kind of answered it a little bit where you want to become one, but could you put an average jockey on an amazing horse and have success?
I think the best way to describe it, probably in the last 10 or 15 years, the best jockey riding here in New Zealand is Opie Bosson. And he has been head and shoulders above the rest. In the past 2 years, a lot of new boys have come in from England, South Africa, Ireland, and they've certainly narrowed the gap. There's a lot of very good jockeys riding here in New Zealand at the present time. But up until about 2 years ago, before they all arrived, I would say if horses went across the line within, say, a length and a half of each other, and the first 5 horses went across the line, whichever Opie Bosson was on of those first 5, it would be finishing in front.
Really?
So, yes, it does make a difference.
Yeah, it's a really good way of putting it. I can understand that. Okay, so you've had this epic career, and the hardest thing in these is to pinpoint which parts to talk about. But I spoke to your wife, Bridgette, and I want to read what she said. I asked her what are the most interesting chapters, and she said, he left being New Zealand's champion jockey to start from scratch again in Hong Kong. The world's best jockeys from each country would go to Hong Kong and ride because it was the place to be. So he went from being a big, big fish in a small ocean here in New Zealand to going to Hong Kong and being a very little fish in a big one. And the only way he succeeded there was by hard work. His work ethic just came into play. He rode more horses. He was just at the track every morning, riding more than anyone else, more than he would normally ride, just to develop connections. He did a lot of networking. It was just really hard to break into Hong Kong, but he broke in. He did the whole year. He was 3rd on the premiership, which was huge. He had to do it all on his own. It didn't matter what family he came from or what he'd done in New Zealand. Nobody cared. You had to prove yourself in Hong Kong, and he did. I think that gives really good insight. But the point of that, which I was really interested in talking about, is the networking element. How can you tell us about that and why that's important?
Well, we actually used to joke we'd go to the opening of an envelope, back then, because, you'd go out with owners or, if you'd meet them, basically if a jockey in Hong Kong back then in the day, they were like an All Black Heroes in New Zealand. That's the best way to describe it. It's the only legal form of gambling. I think that they may have soccer now, but back then you were sort of you were pretty much worshipped when you were a jockey back in the day. And you would go, by going out, you'd give them face. If you were seen with them, we don't have that sort of face here in New Zealand. It's rubbish. But in the Chinese culture, they believed in that. And I still think it goes on to this day now. So we went to everything. And by going out, sitting with owners, and they might have a horse, or they got a friend who's got a horse, so the friend would get invited along. And that's what we did. And of course, I wasn't I was one of the worst jockeys there. I was riding there when I turned up. There was Lester Piggott. The older listeners, they know it. Lester Piggott, arguably the greatest rider ever in the world. And there were guys like that. I was competing against Michael Kinane, Gary Stevens. He was off the Seabiscuit movie.
Yeah. How old were you at this point?
It was about 93. Better do the
Do the maths
on that. 93. Yeah, so it's early 30s, and 93. And I spent about a year and a half up there because when I first went there, I was invited up there by the Hong Kong Jockey Club as a club jockey. So you go up there and I did 3 lots of 3 months, and then I was retained by a stable for 12 months. But it's a tough gig. Hong Kong's a tough place to break in. When you're winning, no better place in the world. When you're losing, toughest place. And I would get there. Bridgette's quite correct. I'd go to the track in the morning, and the track, I think, opened at 5. I'd make sure I was always there by 10 to 5, waiting. And I'd be the last jockey to leave. And when I got up there, I didn't kick off. Certainly didn't kick off riding a lot of winners, and I was doing it tough. And I honestly think some of the trainers felt sorry for me. And they thought, I'd be the last. I wouldn't leave. You got one to work. And I'd just carry on all morning. And these are slow work mornings when you're just cantering around and around. It was pretty hard work. But I think just through perseverance, knowing if I'm going to make it here, at least if I'm going to fail, at least I'm going to fail knowing that I've given it every opportunity. And that's just the way I've been brought up.
Is a move like that to Hong Kong at that period of time, is that something that you're viewing as setting yourself up for the future? You know, how All Black, to use your All Black analogy, how they go and they get, a big payday somewhere overseas. Is that how you viewed it in terms of your vocation?
Yeah, it was, but it wasn't a guaranteed payday. You still had to get there and do it. We didn't get, there was no big retainer just to go there. There was a small amount guaranteed, but it was certainly, I was probably doing better here in New Zealand. It was very difficult at the time where I'd won 9 premierships straight here in New Zealand, 9 championships straight. And, it was just going to carry on. I was on a roll. I did it. One of the reasons, there's 2 reasons I did it. Financially, I knew if it came off, I was going to do well. But secondly, I think as much as anything, to prove to myself that I could do it on the big stage. It was the next challenge up. People would say, well, you've been under the umbrella of the Wexford banner, riding for your father and brother. Still had to perform, here. And as I said before, if I didn't perform, I was taken off them. So it was a challenge to me. Did I want to go? It was hard to go. I wasn't excited about going, but I knew for myself long term I had to do it.
The networking, does that extend to boozing? No. Hanging out with the owners and stuff, is it a very social, you've got to go out to the pubs with them sort of thing?
No, not really. It was more high-class restaurants. They were sort of the upper echelon of people in Hong Kong, if you like. If you're a member of the Jockey Club, it's quite a prestigious thing. You have to be a member to own and race a horse. So no, it wasn't. It was more drinking coffee, small talk, chat. It was no alcohol. That certainly wasn't a big thing there.
Did you have an appreciation for that culture before you went up there, or did you have to learn it when you arrived? Because there are some real nuances to operating in up in Asia.
Well, funny you say that. Right from when we were young children, we sat up for dinner every night, and my mother always trained us. She said, "I want you to be prepared if you're going to have dinner or lunch with a queen, you're going to do it correctly."
I had that in my household as well.
So every night, I still correct my daughters now.
Yeah. I know. So my mum smashes me around as well.
So every night we had to sit up at dinner, and you had to eat, the right knife, the right fork, and the tables had to be set.
Elbows off the table. Were you one of those ones? Yeah.
Exactly. So it certainly, it wasn't difficult to adapt to it. It was, in fact, when you look at, have you ever eaten with some of those people, they certainly think it's good manners to actually slurp their food, which we sort of frown upon, but that's the way they do it.
I want to move into the Japan Cup win in 1989. So the world's richest race at the time. You've gone on there on Horlicks and done it. Can you tell us about that period? What made that so special, and was that one of the career highlights?
Well, it certainly was a career highlight, to win a Japan Cup, first of all, to run in the races by invitation only. So for the people that know something about horse racing, that year there was the winner of the Breeders' Cup in America, the Arc de Triomphe in France, of course, and I think there was a Derby winner from England. So, the best of the best get to go there. And as you say, it was the richest race in the world, 1989. We were there in 1985 with our Waverley Star, and he won the lead up, the Fuji Stakes. He ran in the Japan Cup. He finished 5th, but it's a tough course in Tokyo, very undulating, and probably found the 1.5 miles just a little too testing. The year we went up with Horlicks, she'd been on the road probably for about 3 months travelling. My brother Paul, that's all he did. He travelled with all the international horses. She'd gone over to run in the Cox Plate. She was favourite for the Cox Plate. On the morning, she spiked her temperature, had to be withdrawn. A week later, she lined up in the McKinnon Stakes, which is Derby Day at Flemington. She won the Group 1 McKinnon Stakes, broke the track record there, and then she flew out 4 or 5 days later to Tokyo, which was, pretty unheard of back then in the day. No New Zealand horse had gone there and competed. The closest one had finished was 5th, I think, our Waverley Star. So when we went up there, Brother Paul, of course, he'd been on the road, I think, about 3 months with her before the Japan Cup, and I went up there probably I got there on the Thursday. They raced on the Sunday. She had a serious head out on the Friday, and it was quite amazing because after the Friday, all of a sudden, we had some real confidence. Not that she was going to win, but that she was going to run well. We were looking at the rest of the horses that were massed for the race, and we'd never competed against that sort of opposition in the past. Going into the race, I can recall the day of the race, and you talk about nerves before a big game. And all the jockeys had to travel out early before the first race and stay on course. Look, I applied because you had to travel out at about 9 o'clock in the morning. I think the race took place at about 4:30 in the afternoon. I applied to get special permission to travel out late, which they actually allowed me to do. And when I got on course, it was probably still about 4 hours before the race. And I thought, geez, what am I going to do to fill in my time here? So I walked over to the barns, which are on course where the horses were stabled. And it was stormy outside. And I went into the barn, and there was just my brother Paul sitting on a hay bale next to the horse. And she was there because she was the only horse from Oceania at the time. She was stabled alone because of quarantine, etc. And look, I can recall, you think of some of the moments that you can actually remember very clearly. I sat down on another hay bale opposite Paul. So there's Paul, myself, and the horse was standing sort of with a head in between us. And we talked about the race and this and that and what we expected. We probably chatted, we were probably there for 45 minutes to an hour. And I can always remember when we stood up and he gave me a hug and he said, good luck. It's one of those moments where you're like going to war, and there was, how big it was, the actual occasion. There were 148,000 people on course.
Holy shit.
There's so many spectators. And you think of a test match, and what do we get? 40, 50,000. Yeah. There's 148,000 people went through the turnstiles. And this race was televised all around the world. And it was, you talk about big events. There was nothing bigger than this in the racing industry. During the race, we're fortunate, we drew gate 2, and she was able to lob, third the fence behind the pace. I think, what were there, 16 or 18 runners, a pretty full field. And I can recall during the run, they were just going so fast. And I wished I was sort of 2 or 3 places further back because they were just running the race at breakneck speed. I think they ran through the first 1,200 metres in 1:10, 1 minute 10. That's from a standing start. Well, they run that in open sprints over 1,200. So it was just breakneck pace. And they ran through the first 600 metres in something like 33 and a bit seconds. Now, anybody who understands anything about horse racing, they know the figures that I'm giving them are just impossible. It's like running a marathon and you're running your first mile in a ridiculous speed. You're gonna knock up. You're gonna get tired. So we got to about the 600, and then all of a sudden Horlicks started to come up on the bridle, started to really travel. She was comfortable during the race, but was always just going because of the pace. And all of a sudden she came up on the bridle. And that was the moment that I knew, well, hey, we're in with a real chance. Because we'd been there in 1985, knowing a bit about the track, when you come into the straight, there's quite a rise. And it probably flattens out at about just under the 300 metres. There's a big run in. About the 300 metres, it flattens out again. And we looked at all of the races going into it. We knew whatever led at the top of the hill usually went on and won. And so we rode it to lead at the top of the hill. So in other words, I turned for home and I'm off. I'm going to lead at the top of the hill. She hit the front and it's the last 250 metres. Bridgette was a long way. She was walking. She ran the last 214 and a bit seconds. Now that's slow. You know, when you're thinking about, well, they run the first 633, well, they're running 11s. There were a couple of 10-second sectionals with 14 and a bit for your last 200. That is just walking. You know, that's pedestrian pace. The roar of the crowd was something I've never ever heard or felt before. And the best way to describe it, if you stand in front of a speaker and you can feel the bass coming out of the speaker and vibrating on your body, I had that feeling. And that's the only time in all of my riding career that I've ever actually felt that. You can imagine the roar from the crowd because a horse coming down the outside was actually the Japanese Derby winner. And he was the favourite. And he actually finished second. And look, they wouldn't have wanted to have gone another 2 strides and we would have finished second. You know, that's how quick she was stopping. But that's probably, you know, you talk about amazing times and amazing moments in your career. It was certainly the Japan Cup.
What's that? 140,000 people all for this main race, and you're the one that wins it. Like, what's the aftermath feel like? What's the 10 seconds after you realise you've won? What's the minute, the 5 minutes? What's the aftermath?
Yeah, look, it's 148,000 people. Of course, it's surreal. It didn't sink in at the time, and I think it's not until, you know, days after where you just think of, you know, just how big the occasion has been. But, you know, it was sort of, you know, coming back to the, you know, the winner's enclosure in front of that many people. And it's just, you know, I suppose people get the same thing from the Melbourne Cup. But, you know, 148,000, it was just surreal, the whole thing. I had to pinch myself, to be honest.
How do you celebrate that? Like, is it a big night after? Like, it's got to be a big night after that, right?
I'd tell you what, it was a huge night.
Get that fucking champagne and ice.
Why don't you put it in the fridge?
Well, I tell you, we didn't have many people from New Zealand travel up that year. It was the first year that they hadn't sent a commentator up to call the race. And in fact, Keith Hobb is a commentator, very famous in his day, and he went up on his own accord and he commentated the race, which was televised back to New Zealand. But I understand it was like a 35-minute delay back here to New Zealand. 35-minute delay. So my brother at the time, he owned in partnership a nightclub in Matamata called JJ's at the time. So what they did, they got everybody in there, locked the doors, and so nobody took the phones off the hook. And
love it.
There were no mobile phones back in those days. Well, if they did, you're carrying around a brick. Yeah. So there's nobody carrying those. And they watched it, they thought was live.
Amazing. Can you imagine?
Yeah, so it was chocker, you know. Yeah. So they watched it all live. And you can imagine how they celebrated till all hours of the morning. But I can recall when we did celebrate, there was my mother. There was a couple of reporters from New Zealand. I'm just trying to think. Dave from the South Island. Sorry, Dave, I can't think of his surname at the moment. It'll come to me. Keith Hobb and my parents, my brother Paul and myself. And we went out. We ended up in some bar afterwards. It wasn't even flash. In fact, I can recall a rat running across the floor. so yeah, we celebrated till all hours of the morning. We had to travel home the next day. And because it was such a big race, Japan Racing Association flew everybody first class. And it's the only time I've ever sat in first class with the worst hangover, could eat or drink nothing. What a waste of a trip.
On On the money thing, so we can work in hypotheticals if you don't want to give real numbers, but I'm interested in the breakdown of, say it's $1 million race, right? And you win. What breakdown, what part goes to the jockey? What goes to the owner? Like, how is there a system for it?
Well, the trainer receives 10%, jockey 5%.
Is that all standard?
That's standard. So that's not paid by the owner. That is paid by the club. We'll pay the trainer 10%, jockey 5%.
Club is in the club that's hosting the event?
Yes. Look, it's all changed now. That's how it was back then. It's New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing now, so they pay out automatically every fortnight. And then any presents back to the Japan Cup, the winning jockey received a luxury sedan from Japan. And that was, they actually fly it back to your country. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey. But 5%, you're still on the money thing.
5%, yeah. Look, the race was worth, back then it was about 3.4 million back then. And look, of course, the winning horse might have got 60% of the stake money, and, the stake money gradually goes down. Look, I can't recall what it was, but it was pretty good at the time.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but generally when you go to a meet, you would ride multiple horses.
Correct.
On a day.
Yes.
But for the Japan Cup, was that the only ride that you had for that day?
Well, just one ride, yeah.
So that's a very different experience for you in terms of that wait for that moment.
Oh, yeah. It'd be, look, a few of the other jockeys, the international jockeys, were certainly far better known than what I was. And of course, they were given lead up, warm up rides prior to. But yeah, I was cold turkey out there. It's like lining up trying to kick a goal from halfway and you haven't had a practice shot. That's
Stephen
pretty
Donald
much how it was. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
and then, I guess, sorry, back into the numbers of the crowd, but does that crowd build through the day?
Well, not so much in Japan, and they actually camped outside the venue. Because the turnstiles, I understand, opened at 8:30 in the morning, and they run to their position. But it's like you go to races in Japan or Hong Kong, you can run to your seat, and you get that seat, and when you get off it, you can put your paper or your binoculars on that seat. Nobody will touch it. You've got it for the day. You can imagine doing that in New Zealand. You come back, your binoculars, and you would be gone.
Yeah.
But that's how it is in Japan. Nothing, that's your seat, and nobody touches it.
Great detail on the storytelling, by the way. The other one, there's two Cox Plates I want to talk about. The first one is 86, right? Widely regarded as the best Cox Plate race of all time. Once in a lifetime race called incredibly by Bill Collins. Bonecrusher versus our Waverley Star, nose to nose for 800 metres. But then you end up being on the losing side of the greatest race. And I wondered now, compared to all the accolades and the amazing career, does it hurt being on the wrong side of that? Or was it like a career highlight being part of it?
I think for me, it was a career highlight because going into the race with our Waverley Star, it was matched as a 2-horse race. Our Waverley Star had won a race in New Zealand prior to. Bonecrusher had a higher profile, of course, at the time. Our Waverley Star had won a race at Matamata on his home track, and it was over a mile, and he'd broken a track record that had stood for 20 or 30 years, and he put up just a phenomenal performance, and the further he went, the further he was getting in front. So when they went over there, it was billed as a 2-horse war, and that's how it was really written up by the media and in the papers. Going into the race, look, I drew a wideish gate, and I was getting a bad run. I was caught 3 deep, 3 wide, 3 places out from the fence. I was the only horse in the field getting a bad run, if you like, and I was probably 3 parts back. Bonecrusher was back following, but 1 off the fence, plenty of cover. The plan for the race went completely out the window. For us to do what we did was never a plan, and as it worked out, to explain to everybody at home, the 2 horses took off from about the 900-metre mark, went around the whole field, and just kept going. So it was a 2-horse duel. What happened is at about the 900-metre peg, when I was still parked out 3 wide, Bill Collins, the commentator, said, and Waverley Star, our Waverley Star, would have to be far lap to win. That's the sort of trip I was getting. It was just an impossibility for the horse to win. Gary pulled out at about the 900 metre mark and he went to go round me. So he's out 4 wide. So in other words, he's going to put the pressure on me and make me chase. I thought at that time, I've had such a bad run. I'm 3 deep. I'm going to go. I'm going to push him 4 deep around the next 2 corners. And that's what happened. If either of those 2 horses had been beaten, we would have just been crucified. It was just when you look back, the arrogance of not only the jockeys, but from the 2 horses to actually to continue on and do what they did, it was just an impossibility. It's a shame there had to be a loser. There were just 2 great warriors, and that's the best way to describe them. I believe it probably killed Bonecrusher in the sense that he was probably never the same afterwards. Our Waverley Star, he was off up to Tokyo. He went up there. He won his next start.
Why was Bonecrusher never the same afterwards?
I think it was just an absolute gut buster. That's my theory on it. Whether it be right or wrong, I'm not sure. But the 2 horses had a gut buster. And I don't believe he ever performed to that same level ever again. Our Waverley Star, it was tough as tough. He travelled up onto Tokyo. He won the lead up to the Japan Cup, finished 5th in the Japan Cup, came back the following year, won a Group 1 in Australia, finished 2nd in 2 Group 1s after that, and then was taken off my father and given to another trainer in Australia. He never, ever won another race. He was never the same. He had a lot of quirks about him, the horse. My father was he was a great trainer. He was probably, if I wasn't his son, I'd probably say he's a genius trainer. So I'm not going to say yes, but he probably, that's how good he was. He knew the horse, and he was great with all of his horses, but the horse never won another race, never looked likely.
That's such a great description. Our contacts have said you've got to watch this race before you talk to Lance. And I got I'm not a racing guy, but I got goosebumps. Like the call and the duel and the finish. Like what an incredible!
I think you got to understand Moonee Valley. Moonee Valley, the crowd is on top of the horses. The stands are virtually on top of the track. So it's like a cauldron where you're down there, and to ride at Moonee Valley, it has that feel. It's only a very short straight, but to ride there, when you go out to compete, they have the trumpets going on the Cox Plate. They play these trumpets, and it's like the trumpets before, the old day, the chariots. You go into war and do sort of thing, and the hype that you get when you're at the start in the Cox Plate is just, I believe if the Cox Plate was run on any other track, it wouldn't have the same height. But because of where it's run, the venue, and the close proximity to the crowd of the players, if you like, it just takes it to a whole nother level.
Just while we're at Moonee Valley, it's not a happy yarn. It's the site of one of your biggest tumbles, the biggest injuries that you suffered. Can you take us back to that race?
Yeah, it was Cox Plate Day another year, and I was down to ride another horse, Viali, and it was 1 or 2 races before the Cox Plate, and I had given another ride by an Australian trainer. Long story short, you had a horse come out up on my outside going down the side of the 600. Was my horse's first start ever in blinkers. Blinkers are the shades they put over the horse's eyes where they can see it. It takes some of their vision away, but they makes them concentrate. They look directly in front. So when the other horse came up on my outside, I was actually in front. The horse got a glimpse of it, panicked, went left. Long story short, took out a fair bit of the running rail and went through the fence. I broke my femur in 2 places. I remember lying on the track at the time, and I thought, my horse in the Cox Plate, I thought this has got a real chance. And my leg was sore at the time, and I thought, we can strap this. I'll get away with it. We'll strap this, and I'll be able to go out there and compete. But when I looked down, my bone was through my pants. It'd come all the way through. So I thought my chances competing, they're probably not good.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those things. I was off for 18 months. I had a rod inserted into my femur, went through my hip, the top of my thigh, and bolted by my knee. And I had it in for about 12 months. I went back and I started to ride work, and I was going to get a clearance to ride, and I was still pretty uncomfortable with it in. And when I went for a final X-ray just to clear me, they found out that it hadn't knitted at all. So the whole procedure had to be repeated. Had to have another rod put into my leg, bone graft, and long story short, I was off for 18 months. So it was just one of those things. But hey, that's your job.
It's like any big injury. When you get back onto the horse,
back on the horse.
He's done it. I couldn't. I was halfway down. I couldn't. But when you get back on the horse, do you have to put that to the back of your mind? And do you have strategies and tactics to remove that risk from your thought?
Do you know, funny thing is I had just over 15,000 race day rides, and I had 14 race day falls. Not once did I ever go back out there to compete where I actually gave it any thought. You know, the only, and I think the more I rode, you know, you talk about you get fears in your job. And I had probably over the last 2 or 3 years, I had a big fear. My biggest fear was losing. And that's hard to comprehend. I think the second to last year I rode, my strike rate was better than 1 in 4 was my strike rate. Every time I went out to compete, better than 1 in 4 was actually winning. And you had a fear of losing. And it's hard to describe. But, you know, you just didn't want to lose. So, you know, the fear of actually getting hurt out there, I never actually had that fear.
Is there a bit of gamesmanship that goes on with the jockeys, you know, just before the race? Like, is there a bit of shithousery? Is there a bit of shit talking? And trying to get a bit of that smile tells the story, doesn't it? Advantage over your peers.
Look, there's a little bit of gamesmanship, especially, you know, I can you know, big races. You know, you're going out. 1989, we had our first $1 million race here in New Zealand. 1989, I think it was 89, 90, somewhere thereabouts. And of course, at Ellerslie, you've got the old lockers, like the old rattly old school lockers, if you want, or you see them in the gridiron games on TV. And I can remember the first time I went out there, and it was a big one, you know, $1 million race. And I got my head, of course, you got your skull cap, and I'll slam my head into the locker a couple of times. Come on!
Oh, yeah, really?
That's the only time I did it. Time I did it, but it was quite good. And then when you'd walk out, you talk to no one. Someone talked to you, and you just completely ignore them. And it's the only time I did it, actually. But yeah, there is a bit of gamesmanship. Certainly is. You know, when you talk about a few stories, I remember one day we were at a extremely lowly rated meeting, and there was a particular race. It was actually Taupo, and I think there were 5 or 6 runners. There was one horse, and it was just unbeatable. You know, when you looked on paper, it couldn't get beat. And so anyhow, we started on this jockey. You know, started congratulating him from race 1, and there was a few of our jockeys. Good on you for race 9. It was a nothing race. By the time we went out there to compete in this race, this guy was I've never seen a bloke so nervous in all your life.
You got him.
And we had him. Anyhow, long story short, he missed the start by 4 lengths and got back and ran into trouble, this and that, and it got beaten. And so you talk about gamesmanship, but it was it was a bit of a joke at the time, but, you know, some people cope with pressure, some don't. And you talk about, you know, pressure, you know, I talk about any good sportsman, you talk about pressure. What is pressure? Pressure is a privilege. It's a privilege to be in that position. Like, you're going out there, you're riding the best horse. You're going to have the opportunity to kick the goal. You know, you're put in that position because of, you know, you're trusted. You know, it's a privilege to be under pressure. And that's the way I looked at it.
Is that jockey community a tight-knit community, despite the rivalries and the obvious competitiveness between everybody?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I suppose when I was in Hong Kong, and all the time I was there, I went out with other jockeys only on one occasion, where the jockeys got together one night and had a bit of a bash, but it was only on one occasion. In New Zealand, I think it probably is. I never really socialised with many of them. I didn't have many good jockey friends at the time. Was it by choice? Maybe. You know, I think at the end of the day, you talk about being friends with a jockey. It's like us three sitting around here. We're all jockeys, and all of a sudden, I see you being beaten on a good thing, and as I'm walking back in, I'm saying to the trainer, "I'll ride that for your next start."
Yeah,
you can't really be their good friend. You're punching their livelihood. So I think to be their good friend, you're pretty two-faced. I think it got towards the end of my latter years, probably my last 2 years, sitting in the jockey's room, I was a bit of a loner in the sense that, I had a couple of other, guys who I consider friends, and you'd walk in and they'd say, "Oh, well done, well done." But it got to a stage where I think if I finished second in a race, you'd have 25 other jockeys saying to the other guy, giving him a pat on the back, or "Well done, well done." I know it's only because they beat me.
Yeah.
But that was actually good motivation as well.
I want to give, we mentioned him before, I want to give a little bit more airtime to James McDonald. He's ridden 108 Group 1 winners all over the world, and he's only 33. He's so far ahead of the absolute all-time greats of the game in terms of his age and relative achievements. A megastar around the world, an absolute freak. Is he on track to be the greatest of all time?
Well, his stats would certainly suggest that. It's difficult to compare different athletes from different eras. Are the All Blacks now better than what they were 30, 40 years ago? Myself personally, do I think he's the best jockey to have ever come out of New Zealand? There is no doubt. There's no argument for it. And we've had some very good jockeys. We had our Jimmy Cassidy's, Brent Thompson, Shane Dye. Shane Dye, at the age of 33, had ridden 93 Group 1 winners in Australia. He went to Hong Kong. His record would have been not as good as James's, but certainly up there. But will he be the best if he can stay in the saddle and not get hurt? Probably will be. Lester Piggott will probably always be the number one. But James is certainly going to be the greatest from this part of the world, without a doubt.
And what is it about him that makes, when you compare him to yourself, is it just that same, oneness with the horse, that same work ethic?
Look, I was a good jockey. James is next level. Let's not pretend he is next level. He's gifted, got beautiful hands. You talk about, why is a rugby player so good? They got great hands. And it's similar to a jockey. He's just got hands where, most horses, where they'd be pulling, ripping and tearing, he rides them on a long rein, they put the head down and they'll relax from. He's a part of the horse. But he's been brought up with horses right from an early age, and my understanding, he was gifted way back then. He was riding work for an elderly trainer now called Alan Jones, and he was based in Cambridge. And he recognised the boy's talents right from an early age. He said, "This is, he's going to be anything." In fact, he said he's going to be the next Lance O'Sullivan, but he was miles better than me. But it was just an era where, you watched him come through. The only thankful thing I can say about James McDonald is he was in a different era to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here now.
We were recently at the Halberg Awards, and he was nominated for Sportsman of the Year. And I think, is it maybe his achievements and what he's doing a little bit underappreciated by mainstream New Zealand, because horse racing can be seen as a little bit of a niche sport?
Well, back in the day, I was actually nominated for a Halberg Award as well, but my nomination was withdrawn, and there was actually, this is going back probably the 80s, and there was a write-up in the paper about it. In fact, I kept it in my scrapbook at home.
Motivation?
And well, no, it was because I was deemed to be a professional. Back then the All Blacks weren't paid, but because I was being paid for what I was doing, they said, no, it was unfair. Look, I wouldn't have won anyway, but it was not allowed to go through where I was one of the nominees. But yeah, he's certainly, knowing what I know about the game, he's certainly, a worthy, not only nominee, but, could have won it. That's how good he is in his field. Hopefully he will one day.
I want to just touch on animal welfare. Racing's had its challenges in terms of animal welfare, but I'm interested in getting a behind-the-scenes look, because what I've heard is the horses are treated like kings. It's like daily massages and heat massage jackets, and treated like athletes. Is that what's really going on behind the scenes?
Oh, the way the horses are treated, just for argument's sake, I just go to our yard at Wexford, and they're fed 4 times a day. The attention to detail, their temperatures are taken early in the morning. They're treated so well. Their covers might be changed 2 or 3 times a day. There's just no stone unturned. It's just like this morning before I left, we marked down 11 horses to be treated by the chiropractor today. And then, you get another one, they'll get, someone just to come in before the race, just to give them a massage and this and that. They're treated so well. When you walk down our yard, I think one of the things I get a lot of pleasure about is I can walk down there and the horses have their head over the box door and I can pat them and they want to be patted. So they're treated so well. They're actually happy. And if they're not happy in that particular environment, we have another place nearby that has paddocks and they can live in a paddock 24/7 where they're under a shady tree. And at the end of the day, if a horse is not happy, it won't perform, it won't win. And so what we have to do is to have the horse just relaxed, happy, in a good headspace, because if they're not, they won't perform.
One of the people we spoke to in prep for this was suggesting, and this might be wrong, but the public perception with horse racing is that because they see them getting whipped, that they think that the horses are being hurt and it's kind of like cruel to them. But then they also explained that it doesn't hurt at all with the whip.
Exactly. Look, the whip they have now, it's changed a lot. And the whip they have now, it just makes a noise. Now, I could bend you over and hit you with one of these, like the old days school cane. You probably had it.
Time that's been brought to the fore on this podcast. 208 episodes, and finally someone brings it to the table. I knew that about the horse industry.
Bit of bondage and all that.
I knew there was some stuff in there. It's one of those unspoken things that everybody knows, but no one talks about.
Well, I'm talking about it. But no, the whip they use now, it's purely just for noise. It's just like hitting a cardboard box. That's what it's like. And it doesn't hurt. It doesn't. Like I've, tried it. Not on my wife or anything, but I've tried it.
We're back there again. Now we're in.
You got me going now. But no, it sort of, it doesn't hurt at all. And look, I think the whip rule now, it's been changed a lot where they're only allowed to hit them 6 times or something from the last 600 meters. It's just...
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not. It might be every second stride from the 100 meters. It's certainly not like the old days. It's certainly changed.
But why would they?
That's here in New Zealand. That's here in New Zealand.
If it's just a sound, why would they have a rule like that?
That rule is for the person who just said to you that it looks like horses are getting whipped and hurt, and it's just
it's purely for the perception.
Exactly, nothing else.
My basic understanding, is there an element of safety to it as well in terms of if the horse has a situation on the track that the sound is able to direct it or guide it in a certain way?
Well, I think a lot of jockeys have talked about taking the whip away completely. It'll probably happen one day. In 20, 30 years from now, and you will see a lot of horses just won't run. Some horses need a bit of encouragement, and it might just the noise encourages them to go. Also, from a safety point of view, if a horse is hanging out, and sometimes a horse will lay out and not come around the corner properly, but if you give them a tap on the neck, it's a guide. And from that point of view, I know from a safety, there'd be a lot of jockeys wouldn't be happy to go out without that sort of tool, helping to aid their horse and guide them around the track.
Are you also using your voice as a tool? Like on the
Absolutely.
Like what are you saying on the home straight?
There's a family show. We can't say what we're saying. There's certainly a lot of encouragement with it.
It's not a family show, by the way.
No, I think there's a lot of yelling and screaming and the horse's ear to try and get it to sometimes concentrate and keep running to the line. And there's certainly a lot of that. And there's a lot of jockeys make different noise. Sometimes just be a click or, it could be anything. Some people yell and scream, and they're all different.
You're right entrenched in the industry, so it's normalized for you. But I guess for us, there's probably an element of not wanting to offend you in terms of the questions around animal welfare, because it is an interesting area to go into. And there are some pretty strong opinions, I guess, around the validity of horse racing moving forward. So what's a message from within the industry that you can kind of send out there for other people to get a better understanding of it?
Look, it's a sport of kings. The horses are treated like kings. I say to anybody, go into a good racing stable yard, have a look just how well the horses are treated, just how contented they are. They're just, I can't describe. We always brought up where before we were allowed to have breakfast or leave, the horse had to have been, all of its needs and everything be completely taken care of. Fresh water twice a day, their boxes cleaned out. We clean them out 3 times a day. They're treated so well. Go and visit a racing stable and then try and tell me they're not treated well.
So, age of 39, you decide it's time to hang up the whip.
Well, no, apparently not. It's still
professional. It was just time. Like, what led to that decision?
Well, I'll tell you what led to that decision. It was there's a couple of things actually. We had a boy from Hong Kong staying with us, and he was a jockey there, and he came over and he lived with us for about 3 months. And he said to me, we're coming home from a race meeting, and he said to me, I want to ask you something. So what's that? He said, I've been to the races with you every day. And he said, every day, 2 days in that last 3 months, you've ridden at least one winner. But he said, you're the same whether you win or lose. Why do you do it? And that sort of got me thinking. That was one thing. The second thing, I'd come back from my accident. I rode the next season. I finished 3rd on the premiership. I still had a rod in my leg. Couldn't perform to the same. I wasn't as effective as what I was. The next season, I got the rod out. I rode 193 winners. The next season, I won the premiership by 49 wins, clear of second jockey. My last 3 rides all won. That I went out to compete in my last 3 races, I won them all. And I was driving home from the races that day, and I thought, it's time to go now. Otherwise I was just going to come back, do the same again, repeat the process. Would I have been leading jockey? Probably. Injury was starting to become a big part. I had 2 young daughters. Although I'd suffered a pretty horrendous injury, every time I went out there, I had to tape my leg. And some days I'd pull the tape off and there'd be blood underneath the tape. It was just constant wear and tear. And it was just, I discussed it with my wife, Bridgette. We had the racing awards coming up about a month later. And I said, I'm not going to say anything till after the awards. I'll just let it all play out, go on holiday. And yeah, it was just time. It just felt right to go then. I was still going out on top. I had every record at the time, most number of premierships, most number of winners, Group 1 races, et cetera,
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it was just time to go. I had nothing more to achieve. All I was going to do is hang around, wait for some young buck, some young James McDonald to come around and knock me off my mantle. But it was just time. It just felt right.
I had a really good chat with Bridgette about, and I started by asking about your marriage, because you've been married 30 plus years?
30 years.
30 years.
30 years is Feb.
30 years. And you got together when you were very young, right? Like she was 16 when you first
12.
met.
No.
And the way she spoke about you and your relationship was just like relationship goals. So I was wanting you to, selfishly as much as anything, like what makes such a healthy relationship, and how have you had been so good to each other for so long?
Well, I think we've been together for so long, and we've, it wasn't as though we were together and I was a, successful jockey. I had some good success before we actually met, but we'd been through a lot together, the highs, the lows. And yeah, we just, and it didn't matter whether I'd performed, whether I'd made good decisions or bad decisions in business or racing or whatever. We win together, we lose together. It's like a good wife, no matter even if she thinks you're wrong, she's still going to back you, when everybody else is around. It's like any marriage. You have disagreements. Everybody's going to have, it's not plain sailing. And when we have disagreements, she's very fortunate. I can just tell her where she's wrong and we carry on. No, it's not like that. Look, I think we've always been good communicators. And, we talk, if things are going wrong, not every relationship, things aren't rosy every week. But Bridgette lets me know where I'm wrong and we try and make an amends. And, we've, 30 years later or 34 years together, we're still going pretty good.
How important is Rockspring to your foundation and to your family and to that relationship itself?
It's a property we purchased about 17 years ago. It was a dairy farm, and I always went past there as a kid, on the school bus. Excuse me. And I just said, gee, I'd love to one day own that farm. Not ever thinking the opportunity was going to come up. Long story short, 16 or 17 years later, it came up. It was a big farm, and it was probably about 1,500 acres. We don't own 1,500 acres. We own a small portion of that. But it came up for tender. And it was a hard one to put together, but I said to my wife, let's tender for just the heart of it, not all the surrounding land. And that's what we did. We put it in a good tender just for the main part of it, which included the red barn. And we were fortunate enough to be able to get it back then at the time. I can remember the day of the tender we actually got it. And there was all talk in Matamata who actually had purchased the farm. And we said nothing to anybody for a long time, that we'd actually been successful getting the property. A few people were embarrassed after because they'd told us who'd purchased the farm. I said, is that right? But it was a farm at the time. And I remember when we won the tender and we did not have 1 cent, Bridgette and I, when I say we didn't have 1 cent, we had a lot of other small things around, but we had about 6 months to settle. We had to set about selling all these things, which was a bit of a stressful period. But we made that our family home. We built a house there. And it's a place that hopefully we have grandchildren one day and we're able to enjoy it with them. But it's just a really good hub. It's a place that I've been very passionate about. I'm a bit of a, like my trees and a few other things. And
this is an understatement, isn't it? Yeah. Tell us how many trees have you planted?
Well, I think the last count was over 14,000 or thereabouts, somewhere in that vicinity. And when I say planted, I started in 1985, so it's not all on the place we are now. I've had other smaller places where I planted trees and sold and moved on. And when I say planted trees, I don't say that's not getting a group of people coming in with shovels and digging holes. I dug the holes myself.
14,000 holes.
Well, I got to about 12 and a bit thousand, and I sort of stopped because every year I'd keep a diary of how many trees I'd purchased, what they were, and where I'd planted them. And yes, after about 12,500, I gave up. But I estimate it's in the vicinity of about 14K.
What is it about the trees? What is it about that action and that act that speaks to you so much?
Well, my mother was she was a real gardener, and she had real green fingers. And it was probably through her that my brother Paul, he was very, very interested in trees as well. He's planted a lot of trees. And we just both had the love of trees. There's a tree in Matamata in Centennial Drive right next to the Bedford Park. And it's probably over 100 years old now. And it's a liriodendron. And I always looked at it as a kid and thought, I wonder who was a clever old man who had the foresight to plant that tree way back then. And, another 100 years from now, I want to be known as that clever old man, because trees certainly make a place. The trees that I've planted, none of them have been for forestry. They have no value whatsoever, but they've all been for aesthetic reasons.
There's a great quote, and I had to write it down because I didn't want to mess it up, but it's a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they never will sit under.
Yeah, that's a great saying.
Beautiful, eh?
Great saying. But there's a few trees I can get a bit of shade of. Yeah. But that's a wonderful saying. And that's the old man who planted the tree 100 and so years back.
That's good. That's so cool. It's so beautiful. The delayed gratification, of the trees, and you're doing it for others. Okay, we're on the home straight. Oh, in the game. No, I do want
the winning place.
I do want to give us space to talk about the NZB Kiwi. So it's $4.5 million in prize money up for grabs. By far and away, not just our richest race, but the richest sporting event in New Zealand by a huge margin. The most lucrative day in New Zealand sports. What effect? Well, tell us about it. What effect will this have on New Zealand racing, and what is this?
Well, it's huge. It's like the Everest in Australia. So you have to. There's 14 slot holders. So what happened is all the 14 slots were put up at auction, and we went along to the auction and we purchased one of the slots. Now you'd say, well, why would you buy a slot? Usually, you'd say a big stud or a company would buy a slot. In fact, I don't think any companies actually purchased one, but there were syndicates of people who came together to purchase one. Myself, my brother Paul, and my training partner Andrew Scott took a small share, and we decided to buy a slot.
Is it public what they're worth?
Yes, it is. I think we paid $700 for ours. So
1,000.
Yes,
just to be clear.
But that's so. We have that slot for 3 years.
Okay.
So we have 3 years to. We have a runner for 3 years. At the end of that 3-year term, we get the first right of refusal to buy the slot again. At what price is still to be determined. Hopefully it's less than the 700. But and we decided to go along and buy one because we said if we want Wexford Stables to be big in the racing industry, which it's been bigger than what it is now when my father had it, but it gives our owners a chance to have a runner on the slot. So the slot that we purchase will always be a horse from our stable, where other slot holders now they're going around other barns and can I have this horse? Can I have that horse? But we just thought it's given our owners the opportunity. So every year we go to the yearling sales, we purchase about 15 horses. So if you purchase one of those horses or a share on them, you get a pretty good chance of running in the richest sporting event in New Zealand and the richest 3-year-old race in the Southern Hemisphere.
Can a couple of punters like us get involved
Absolutely.
in that?
Absolutely. So you're talking about buying a slot or buying a share on a horse?
You've already priced me out of the slot, but buying a share on a horse.
Have I got a deal for you? No, I tell you, the way we do it is we go to the yearling sales every year. We buy about 15. We spec them all.
Is this Karaka? Is that
correct?
Is that
correct.
Okay,
correct.
Yeah.
So we the stable spent this year. We bought 15 horses, and then they go up on our website, which my eldest daughter Caitlin puts them all up, and people come on board. And I think we spent about 2.1 million, and I think we've got about 300 and something thousand left to go. So we have people come in and they will buy 1% of a horse. Now there might be a group of guys and they say, "Hey, between us, we're going to buy 10%." So the opportunity, racing used to be the sport of kings. So you had to have a lot of money to race a horse. It's all changed now. And so people are racing them in big syndicates. By doing that, all of a sudden you're getting involved with a group of people. You're meeting a lot of other, new guys. And all of a sudden we're finding that a lot of people are doing that for their networking as well. And they're coming into a horse and all of a sudden they find out, oh, this guy, he's got a real estate company, he's doing this or that. And, so it's a part of networking for guys like you as well coming on board.
Is this race a big mover? So the sort of the health of New Zealand racing in New Zealand, am I right in thinking like in the glory days in the 80s and 90s, it was really thriving and going. Yep. And there's been a bit of a dip, but like a big investment is getting poured back in, $4.5 million purse. Like this is the biggest
absolutely.
race. Is the wave starting to build again?
It's turned. Look, at 80, 89, 90, 91, we had 6 races worth $1 million or more over that period. Recently, as we all know, Entain's come on board, and Entain has just been a game changer for our industry, where all of a sudden now it's, you can buy a racehorse, you can make money. We're racing for serious money now. A lot of the races, the stakes have almost doubled, from what we were competing for 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, in fact. So it's been a big game changer. $4.5 million or whatever the purse is. We're finding a lot of interest from Australia. We're seeing it of late. Horses travelling from Australia coming here to compete. We don't like that much because, the competition's got tougher. But, money is attracting them across the Tasman. For the $1 million race, I think there's for the $4 million race, there's 2 or 3 horses, I understand, coming from Australia. And these are good horses. They're not just, 1 or 2 win horses. These are horses, one horse is coming across. He finished 3rd in the Caulfield Guineas. He ran in the Cox Plate this year. These are serious racehorses. So the competition's going to get tougher, but that's just the money.
So this race is on March 8th at Ellerslie. What are your feelings on race day? Like, do you get nervous? Are you up there like really sweating the result, or are you relaxed?
Look, I'd be lying if I said we don't get nervous. This is our big day. This is the biggest day in New Zealand race, and I think there's $9 million worth of stake money on offer for the day. Yeah, we'll be nervous, all right. But it's what the team all builds for. It's all the staff at home. We've been, ever since we purchased the slot, the staff have all been, had a bit of a sweepstake. Which horse is going to run in the race? It's a big thing. It's a big thing for the jockeys. It's a big thing for everybody involved. It's a big thing for people who have got the slots, trying to find out or trying to find a suitable horse to actually compete in it. We've got one slot, so one Wexford horse will run in our slot, but, we've had other people come on board and inquire about other runners as well. So, yeah, it's an exciting time.
Have you got multiple slots in this race coming up?
We're actually going to have 4 runners. 4 runners. So it's pretty good. Look, I think even the horse that finishes last might get 150K. So it's pretty serious money. So we've got 4 runners and we're hoping to get more. I understand there's 2 more slots that haven't been filled, and we're only now, not too far away from the big event. And so we're certainly hoping that we've got 1 more horse there that is a chance and been taken up. But anybody listening?
So this whole concept around the NZB Kiwi, is this a departure from the way races are traditionally held? The idea of purchasing a slot and I won't say buying your place it is buying your place in the race.
Yeah, it is. It is certainly different. And you look at the class of field that will actually run in the race, it won't be the best lot of horses because you're going to get horses that have only won one race competing in it. But the reason being is everybody's got to try and fill their slot. You might get approached for one of your horses to compete in it, but your owner may not think it's in the best interest of the horse because you're running for a lot of money, but the horse is not actually getting group status, which adds to its value, especially for a filly when it goes to stud. So, I do know of some owners that have declined the offer to run in the race, but certainly, the money attraction is huge. And I think for anybody involved, you want to get a big crowd to the races, put up a race worth $1 million or more, they're going to flock to watch.
You make a really interesting point there where you said it might not necessarily be in the best interests of the horse, which, to loop back to the animal welfare point that we were making before, those are conscious decisions that you've got to make, I guess, as a trainer and as an owner, as syndicate, as to what you do choose to put your horse in.
Yeah, look, exactly. I've actually got a share in a horse myself, and I was approached by a slot holder to run the horse in the race, and I declined. Because it was in the best interest of the horse. Okay, it was going to be great to run, and the prize money, as I said, the last horse gets 150,000. Most slot, you would split it 50-50 with the slot holders. You'd receive 75. But I know myself, for the horse that I've got a share in, he doesn't want to run that phase. The race is over 1,500 metres, and I truly believe he's probably a 1,300 metre horse. So that's thinking of the horse's welfare and not from the money side of it, from the financial side of it. So, yeah, the horse does come first.
Naive. I just thought all horse races were the same distance. Super naive, and there's probably other people. Please, somebody out there, join me in thinking that is the case. But different distances, and the other thing you mentioned earlier, like undulating tracks. I had kind of no real appreciation that every track wasn't flat.
No, well, look. In New Zealand, they're generally flat. The only track that's got real undulation here in New Zealand, got to make sure I'm not leaving anybody else, but it's probably Ellerslie. And it's a tricky track. Ellerslie, when you, from the 1,200 metres, you climb the rise and you start to go downhill into the corner. And the last 100 metres, if you look going out of the straight, they start to rise again. That's where you can see them sort of change the last wee bit in the straight at Ellerslie. You can see them flash home from the back. Very testing track. Not all horses appreciate the undulation. Not all horses race there. But if you get a horse that races well at Ellerslie, there's certainly no better track for them to perform well at. It is, of course, our premier track. But, all horses are different. Some are happy going clockwise, some are better going anti-clockwise. So they all have their separate traits.
I genuinely thought they all just ran the same way every time, like a stock car. I'm going to wrap us by thinking forward to the future. I wondered, are you the kind of guy that has goals? Like, do you write down goals? Like, do you have things that you want to achieve, in the next 10, 20 years?
I have a list of them. And my wife is she's the person who sort of got me into it. You must write down your goals. And I probably started doing it 10 years ago. And it is amazing. Before I won a derby, on a horse, win a New Zealand derby, win a Telegraph handicap. And I would say list of goals, I probably got 12 on there. And I would say 8 of them, I can tick them off. And these were goals that in the racing industry, I'd never achieved in the past, well, as a trainer anyway. My wife is very big. If we want to win a certain race, write it down. Doesn't necessarily happen that year, but we've found it does happen. It does happen. Just going off the subject for a little bit, my wife, who has a red barn, and when she took it over, they were having 2 or 3 events a year. And she wrote down to be the number 1 wedding venue in New Zealand. And it was voted that 12 months ago, number 1 wedding venue, where she's doing 80-something weddings per year. So she's a big believer in that. And so are our children, our 2 girls. Write it down. If you want to achieve it, write it down and it'll happen. Whether it does, I haven't written down win lotto yet, but that certainly hasn't happened.
It just occurred to me, as we were talking, are you quite uniquely placed in terms of someone that has won a major race here in New Zealand as a jockey and as a trainer? Is that quite common, or are you unique in that regard?
Look, there's only, my understanding, 2 other jockeys that have trained a New Zealand Derby winner and ridden one, but there's a lot of other big races like the Auckland Cup. I'm not too sure if another jockey is ridden and trained, Railway Handicap. Well, my father's probably only other jockey. He rode the winner in 1953, and he's also trained it on several occasions. Telegraph Handicap. I think I might be the only jockey to have done both. Quite a few big races, that's correct.
Yeah, because it's like that. It's like that. Win a World Cup as a player and then win a World Cup as a coach.
Same sort of thing.
Yeah,
same sort of thing.
Fascinating. I love that goal stuff. And were you kind of like a reluctant convert? Bridgette has said, you should do this goal stuff. And then you're like, put it off for a while. Then you eventually do it and realise that it's
very
reluctant. A good idea.
Very reluctant.
Yeah, you're projecting. You're very much projecting here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's very much, look, I didn't believe in it to start off. And when a lot of the big races I was trying to win, it wasn't happening. She kept saying, you got to write it down. You got to write it down. And look, I wrote something down probably only about 4 months on the list. And the list, when you look at the old A4 piece of paper, it's starting to get pretty old and tattered, but it's always remained in the same place over the last 10 or so years. And I added to the list the other day. So you never, and I'm sure that I'll add many more to the list in the future. But you've got to set your goals and write it down and try and achieve it.
I'm a very new convert to go. I've sort of been putting it off, is why it's top of mind, because I did mine yesterday, and it felt really good. And it's always been something that I'd thought about doing, but I've finally done it. Anyway, you need to do yours, Shay.
Shay.
Don't worry about me.
Go home, boys, and both write down. own a racehorse.
Here we go.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not going to talk about it at Ellerslie a lot.
Yeah, we've got a meeting with the accountant later on, so we might just have to check the numbers on that.
No, look, I'm going to
Actually, is there a minimum threshold?
Yeah, look weird. People come in, they put in $500-$600. There is anything. But I tell you, it's amazing. You take a guy like Tom Doyle, who's about to very shortly marry my eldest daughter, Caitlin, and Tom is new to the industry. His first two, he's won a Group 1 and the other horses won about 4 or 5 races. Beginner's luck. And he's in a group of, I don't know, he's got a minute share. He'll tell you he owns a hair in its tail. But it's his horse. It doesn't matter how big, how small the share is, it is your horse. And that's how we treat all of our owners.
Yeah, but go and visit the horse and everything. Come in.
You can do it all. You can do the lot. I'll even take you out for breakfast afterwards.
Oh, very good.
We had Chris Wood on the podcast last year, and right at the end, he mentioned how into horse racing he was, and how he'd be interested in getting involved in New Zealand. And I think we had about a dozen messages.
Yeah, I think we'll put him
can you link us up with Chris? We'd name a horse after you. We'd call it Between Two Beers, whatever you want.
Yeah. We'll put Woodsy directly in contact with you.
I was just about to ask you for his number.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll sort that out. Actually, on the name thing, is there an algorithm to come up with a name? Or
well, the way we do it, look, every owner, it doesn't matter if you've got 0.5% in a horse, we'll call for names. And you'll send your name in and you'll call it the 2 Beers, whatever.
Yeah.
And the names will go into a hat and it'll be drawn out. It'll be done on camera and that'll be sent to the owner live. There you go.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's getting closer.
I keep trying to wrap us up. And
sorry.
This is my
chamber. Can you tell if a horse is going to win a race in the birdcage?
You look at a horse in a birdcage, if it's settled and walking around relaxed, you got a better chance than if you're up sweating and if you're uptight and sweating.
It's that sheen on it. It's the sheen, isn't it?
When you go to the races and you want to have a bet, look for the horse that looks half asleep. He's just plodding around. That's a wonder back.
Yeah, good. See, this is useful.
That's good. Keep going, man. Keep going.
Between two bets, the only time I've ever won, I feel like, is when I got a tip from Luke Kemmy's Boys Get Paid. He's really helped me out on that. So with the big race coming up on the weekend, I might just check in with Luke again, see if we can get a good bet.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. This has been amazing in terms of an insight and pulling the curtain back on an industry that I guess I've got some curiosity around, but probably too shy to ask questions for fear of upsetting. So you mentioned before we even started recording that you're an open book in terms of what you will and what you're comfortable with talking about. And I've found it really refreshing to kind of get a better understanding for something that I've enjoyed on occasion, but probably felt a little bit intimidated by not being a horse person going to a track. Yeah, well, you shouldn't feel intimidated. I'm pleased that you've got a good insight into it now, and I hope everybody who listens to this does as well. But I think the only thing that I'd like to emphasise to anybody going to the racing or watching racing on TV is just how well the animal is looked after. It's the horse comes first, and we're an open book and we open our stable. Anybody want to come in and view? Give us a call. Come and look.
And I thank you for coming in and giving us so much of your time. I've learned a lot again across this episode, and it's been so cool. Good luck for the big race coming up, which is going to get, this is being released the week of, so it's this Saturday at Ellerslie. Yeah, it'll be a nervous week. But yeah, just epic. And the trees thing, like the little niche details of what makes you are so special. So thank you for coming in and sharing your story with us. It's been a pleasure. Epic. Thank you, boys. Thank you for having me. Cheers, Lance.